Okay, so in this part of initial expedition training, we're going to talk about tents. Obviously, these are very important if you're going to be doing a multi-day expedition. You want something that's going to keep you warm and dry at the end of the day, and also that's going to be pretty easy to put up and take down, so that you're not having to spend a load more energy on that. So when you're doing something like your Duke of Edinburgh's or 10 tours, you're going to be using probably a 2-man or a 3-man tent. And I've got a couple of examples of those here. These aren't the ones we have at the squadron because I just have different tents, but they're fairly similar and I can show you different bits about them. So if you were to go to shop and want to buy a tent for your Duke of Edinburgh's, then a lot of the time the staff will just be able to tell you what is good for DOV, and sometimes they'll even have a label on them saying Duke of Edinburgh's approved, because it's just exactly the right kind of thing that you want. So this is probably standard sort of one that you would use, and the main things that you want to look at when you're looking for a tent are how many people is it going to sleep. So in this case, this is a 2-man tent, and 2 people can sleep in this, but once we put it up, you might see that you might not want to have 2 people because it's quite snug once you've got all your kit in there. So you might want a 3-man tent if you want to sleep 2 people in it. You also want to look at how much it weighs, because you're going to have to be lugging this about with you for your whole expedition, and you don't want a super heavy tent. Now obviously the lighter you get with the more advanced materials, it's going to be more expensive, but this is 2.5 kilograms, says on there. So once you've split that between 2 members of your team, because it's a 2-man tent, then it's not going to take up too much weight on your expedition. So before your expedition, the first thing you're going to want to do is to check your tent to make sure that all the parts are there and that it's all in a good state of repair. You don't want to get to your campsite at the end of a long day of walking and find that you're missing a part or that there's a great big tear in it. Okay, so a lot of the time as cadets, you're going to be given a tent out of stores, and before you go on your DOV or your 10 tours, make sure that you've checked that tent, that all the bits are there and that it's not broken. The best way to do this is to put it up, okay, get it all out, put it up, and then that also means that you've practiced putting the tent up so that when you do get to the campsite, you know how to do it and it's not going to be a big struggle on your first day. Okay, so this tent that we're going to look at first is a 3-man tent. Okay, you can see the weight there is about 4 kilograms, so it's not too bad if we were to share this between 3 people. Okay, and these are the parts of it that I've taken out of the bag. So generally with most tents you're going to have 2 skins, and you always want to have 2 skins because that's going to keep us nice and dry and warm. Single skin tents are not going to be any good for you on your DOV. So we'll have an outer skin, which is generally the more waterproof one. Okay, this one's a sort of Gore-Tex, and that's going to keep the wet out. Tents do have different rain ratings, waterproof ratings, but generally you won't have to worry about that too much, particularly if you're borrowing it from stores. We'll have got ones that are good enough, and hopefully it won't rain so much that that's a problem. You then got the inner, okay, and this is more of a sort of mosquito net mesh, okay, and that will normally be the one that is attached to the ground sheet as well. So you're going to want to check these over, make sure there's no great big holes in them, but again, that's often easier to do once we've put it up. We then got the poles, and you might not know how many poles your tent is meant to have, but if you look on the instructions for the tent, it should show you how many there should be. Okay, so I should have 2 long ones and 1 slightly shorter one with a red end. Okay, and here are our poles, so all looking good so far. And then finally you need to have pegs, and that's pretty essential. You don't want your tent flying away, and some tents won't stay up properly if you haven't got pegs in. This one actually will, this one's self-standing, but you still don't want it to fly away. And again, on our instruction sheet, there should be 18 pegs in there. So we count through that, make sure we got enough pegs to keep us from the tent flying away. Now, I would put this up to make sure that everything is working and everything's all right, but I actually already know that this tent is broken. Okay, so when I'm checking through everything, I'm going to put my poles together, and I would assemble this tent, but I actually already know that this one's broken. Okay, I've got a snapped pole, so if you were given this tent out of stores, then this would be no good to you. This actually broke while we were putting it up, and that is going to be no use because it's got can't hold the tension in the pole, and that's no good. Okay, so this is just living in our loft, waiting for us to fix that. But that is a very good example of why we want to check our tent really thoroughly. At first glance, it looks like all the bits are here, and it looks like this tent's all right, but actually, it's no good. So moving on to tent number 2, I've given this a once over. It looks like everything's in order in this one, so hopefully this one will be all right to put up. So this is a little 2-man tent, and it's quite nice and lightweight at 2.5 kilograms, and it's actually only got a single pole. So we've got the pole, I've checked that, it doesn't have any cracks like the other one. And it needs to have, it says on the instructions somewhere, that it needs to have 17 pegs. There it is. Should have 17 pegs, and you can see at some point we've lost a few, so we've had to buy a new set, but that's fine, a peg's a peg. And this will be one of the things that quite often you'll be lacking, because maybe somebody else has run out of pegs and they've taken some out of another tent in stores. So make sure you check that you've got enough pegs. Okay, so first thing we need to do is work out how this goes up. Does it go up inner first or outer first? And where do the poles go? So this is fairly simple because it's got a single pole. And have a look in your instructions. Sometimes they are not super clear. Okay, but this is the inner, and we're going to put the pole into the inner. So I've got my inner nicely laid out, ready to put the pole into. One thing that's really important when I'm going to be putting the poles in and putting this tent up is to make sure that all my doors are shut. Otherwise, I'll put it up, get it all nice and taut, and then I might not be able to close the doors. Okay, so as I said, this is a single pole, and the pole's going to go through this sleeve in the tent. Okay, the central section goes through there, and then on the sides it's going to clip in using these. So I'm going to slot your pole together, and they're really easy to do. They should be attached together by elastic, and they just slot into the little sleeves in between them. This particular pole has actually got bends in it. Some of them will have, some of them won't. Just slotting it all together. Oops. It will come apart. Just keep slotting it in until it's all together. Then I'm going to put this pole through the little sleeve in the central section. Push that through, so I've got the middle of the pole in it. And then I'm going to hook these little hooks onto the side portions. So I don't know many tents that actually do that with these hooks, but that's what this one does. Just go across and do the other side. And then we need to give the tent some actual shape. So different tents will do this differently, but at the end of the section with the pole there'll be something that holds the pole onto the tent, and in this case we've got a little hook prong there and a hole in the end of the pole. I'm going to put the pole onto there and then go do the same the other side. So we've now got a bit of shape to our tent. This tent in particular won't have enough shape to actually sleep in until we start putting some pegs in. So before we do start putting any pegs in, we want to make sure that our tent is definitely where we want it to be and where we want to sleep. So I'm not sure if you can see on camera, but I am on a bit of a slope. Ideally you want to find as flat ground as possible, but in this case I've got a slope, so I'm going to deal with it. And I'm going to want my head up the slope, my feet down the slope. If you're the other way around, it would just be weird. If I was across the slope, then I'd just keep rolling into the side of the tent. So I want it head up, feet down in this case. There's other things you want to think about, like you wouldn't want to pitch a tent directly under big trees that are going to drop things on you. You wouldn't want to pitch it right next to a stream or a river if you're at the same level, in case it's going to flood. So there's a few other things to think about, but in this case I've now got it where I want to be. So I'm going to put the pegs in it now to give it a bit of shape, and when you're putting the pegs in, make sure you're pulling it all nice and taut so that nothing's going to be saggy and dropping down on you while you're asleep. So I've put most of the pegs in, and you can now see that it's standing up on its own. It's got a lot better shape. I'll put the final peg in, and in this tent there's two kinds of places where the pegs go. There's this ring at the bottom of the pole, and then in the other places it's just little fabric tabs as you put your peg through the little tab there. And then this is my last peg, so I'm going to pull everything nice and tight. You can see it's tight in that direction, it's tight in that direction, and then push it nicely into the ground. We now want to put our outer on, so make sure that the outer is the same way round as the inner. So we've got a door here, that's the back, this is the front. Okay, I've worked that out because this is the longer end, and I'm just going to pull that up over the top of our inner. If it was a bigger tent, you might need a couple of you to do, but this is a nice small tent. And now we're going to peg out the outer. So again, like with the inner, I've made sure all the zips are shut and that everything looks like it's pretty much lined up. And then again, we're going to be trying to make this as tight as we can so that it doesn't sag down during the night. And I tend to do corners first and then any mid-side ones. Sometimes you'll find that you put them slightly wrong. You have to go back around, move them a bit. And then the final thing to make it even tighter is these, which are called guy ropes. Okay, you can adjust them if you need to, these little adjusters, and then by pulling that out I'm adding even more tension into that skin so it doesn't droop on me in the night. So now that we've got our tent up, we'll have a little look inside. So you can see through this window there's a small amount of porch where we might be able to put some of our kit. So open up the outer, and now the inner, make sure you keep that closed as much as possible to stop any bugs getting in. Okay, so I've put a roll mat in here just to give you a bit of an idea of size. So this is a two-man tent, but once you've got two people, so roll mat one side, me the other side, it's pretty snug. So by the time you want to then add any kit in here, you're starting to struggle. You might be able to move your roll mats down a bit and keep some kit up the back, but in all honesty, if I had this tent on an expedition, I would probably call this a one-man tent. One man plus kit is gonna fit in here. 2-man plus kit is going to be quite tricky. So while you're in here, you'll want to check that you haven't got the inner touching the outer anywhere. At the bottom there, I would probably tighten it up, because if I've got my feet there when I'm asleep, that's going to touch. Got some nice distance here. I can't find anywhere other than at the bottom where the inner's touching the outer without me really poking against it like that. Okay, if I did do that during the night, then any water, condensation or dew that's accumulated on the outer will come through onto the inner. So I want to make sure that I'm not pushing against the inner to the outer. So like here, if I had kit in the back, make sure it's not going to push up onto my outer and get everything soaking wet. Okay, so in the morning now, when you want to take it down, it's almost certainly going to be wet. Even if it didn't rain, then there's going to be dew and condensation on it. So before you even start taking anything down, it might be worth giving it a bit of a shake and a bit of a tap, just to get the main droplets of water off it. And then to take it down, we're going to pretty much do the opposite of putting it up. And now that we've got all the pieces apart, we now need to pack it away nicely. Now if you were carrying this, then of course you might want to pack it away separately. Somebody might carry the inner and the poles, someone else might carry the outer and the pegs, something like that. But in this case, we're going to pack it all away together so that I can put it away. As I say, it may well be wet. The ground sheet almost certainly will be wet, so if you're still eating your breakfast or something, then maybe leave it out in the sun to dry for as long as possible until you have to pack it away. Otherwise, we're then going to pack it, fold it away, so that we're keeping wet bits touching wet bits and dry bits touching dry bits as much as possible. Make sure you get all your guy ropes nice and tidily inside. And because I'm going to pack it together, I'm then going to put the outer on top of the inner. And depending on your exact tent, you might pack it away a bit differently, but in this case, I'm going to make sure that the width of this is no bigger than my bag. That's good. And then I'm just going to roll it up. Tuck any little extra bits in as you go. Keep checking for any slugs, flick them off, make sure you're not going to be carrying them around. You can also do, which I forgot to do then, put your poles in the middle of your roll up so that they're nice and secured as well. Then hopefully another member of your team will help you with this. It's a bit awkward, just get it in the bag. Our bag, and we are ready to do our next day's walking, and we can get it out at the other end. If it's your last day, you get back home, take it out, air it, make sure everything's nice and dry before you put it away for a long time in storage, because if it's wet it'll go all musty, smelling horrible. If we're at the squadron, we'll probably put it up in the main hall over the weekend or until the next parade night, let it dry out, but make sure you're not putting it away all muddy and wet and horrible. Okay, there we are, ready to go next time. So I'm just going to quickly show you another tent and talk about the differences. Unfortunately, I don't have one that goes up outer first, because those are quite different to put up. You put the outer up and then generally the inner will just hook into that outer. But this is the other tent that I have, so we'll have a quick look at it. First glance, it looks a lot more complicated than the other one, but it's actually quite a nice one to put up. So we've got 4 poles, and a lot of the time with tents you will have colour coordinated poles, which makes it easier to see where they go. So all these poles will go through these mesh sleeves, and you've got ones with black ends and ones with blue ends, so it's nice and easy to see which poles go in where. So first things first, I'm going to put the poles in. Okay, so we've got all of our poles in the tent, and now we're going to be putting the ends of the poles into these slots at the ends, at the corners of the tent. Now the first one's easy. When I then go and do the opposite corner, it's going to be a lot harder. I'm going to have to push it up because it will bend the pole into the shape of the tent. So it's much easier if you've got a couple of people doing this, but it's not too difficult to do on your own. So whereas our other tent didn't have any shape until we put the pegs in, this is almost looking like a completed tent already. Obviously it's still only the inner, so if it was raining we'd want to get the outer on pretty quickly. And this is called a geodesic tent, which means that the poles are holding it up into its nice shape, and it's actually pretty freestanding. And this outer, rather than having to peg everything in, actually just attaches to the poles in a similar way to how the inner did. So you've got a similar tag to what you had on the inner, and all you need to do is hook that under and hook it onto that pole. And we do that for all the poles, and it'll pull everything fairly tight once we've done all of them. Make sure, I've got quite a tangled guy rope there, just untangle that. Okay, so as we do more of them, it'll start putting some tension on the outer, and I'll go around and do all the rest. And already we're nearly finished, so I could almost sleep in this, but I'm going to go around, peg all of the solid corners first, then I'll be pegging out the front and back to make the porches, and then I'll peg the guy ropes to get a nice bit of tension on everything. And there we have a nice sturdy geodesic tent, so actually with less effort than the previous one, I've got a really tight outer skin. Granted, this was more expensive than the other one. So looking inside, we've got a bit more porch space than the other one, so leave your boots out here, anything that you don't want to have inside with you. And because it's a dome rather than sort of wedge that the other one was, we have got a bit more space. Width-wise it's about the same, but I would probably put a bag at the top above our heads, and a bag at our feet. We'd probably end up putting our feet on, but you would probably be able to get your kit in here. We're not too much trouble. And again, make sure that you're not pushing against the sides, because you can see that that is touching the side if I push against it. So maybe I'll go and tighten that up a little more, so that if we do put kit in here, it's not touching the sides. But that's a different type of tent, just to show you another version. Okay, so we've looked at a couple of different types of tent. Hopefully that's given you an idea of what sorts of tents you're going to be using on your Duke of Edinburghs or your tent tours, expeditions like that. When we get back on squadron, of course, we'll be doing practical exercises, getting you to put them up, but hopefully for the moment the video's shown you a little bit about what to expect from a tent, what you want to be looking for. So it absolutely needs to be double skin. You need to check that it's going to be waterproof enough. How many people is it going to fit? So a 2-man might not necessarily fit 2 people and all your kit. You might want a 3-man for that. How much does it weigh? So you want to be looking sort of 2 to 4 kilograms if you've got a 2 or 3 man tent. You don't want it to be weighing a lot more than that. And all of these things you're going to have to balance out against the cost. That is it for tents on initial expedition training.